Hi, welcome to Prepisi's second episode of Informal MBA Charts. We are your hosts, Abhinav and Anand, and in today's episode, we bring to you ESA Business School.
Thank you, Abhinav. We are very excited to bring IESE Business School today to you. As you may all know, IESE is not just a top-ranked school in Europe, but also globally. Our panelist today is being represented by Akshay and Amber. Akshay is a BTech and MTech by qualification. He completed his degrees from BITS Goa campus. For the last 5 years, he was working in the consulting industry where he worked with top-notch firms like ZS and IQVIA. Amber brings with him about 7+ years of work experience. In his last role, he was working as a Smart Cities Fellow with Ministry of Urban Affairs. We're very excited to bring both of them, and let's jump on to our section 1 of the interview. Thanks.
All right, let me introduce our first segment today, which is Pick Your Fit. We have Amber and Akshay here with us. So let me start with Amber. Amber, my first question to you in this segment is, how did you go about shortlisting your schools? What was the process like to come up with the first shortlist, and how did you refine it over a period of
time? By the way, hi Abhinav, hi Anand. Yeah, it's a very interesting question because I had multiple approaches to it. I didn't honestly have a single approach. And frankly, when I started out, it was a hodgepodge of approaches. What happened is that eventually, when I started in 2018, I started doing my research and homework on this. I spoke to a lot of my friends who were at business school or who had gone to business school. Now, of course, each one of them had their own perspective. And just like everybody else, I think I decided to hop into the FD rankings and made that my Bible for everything. But what I didn't realize is that while the FD ranking, especially when you go to the website, gives you only a few columns, I made sure to download the entire thing and I zoomed through the, I think there are quite a few columns, I don't remember how many now. And then I started looking at factors I initially hadn't, things like international mobility, research output, ratio of faculty with PhDs, things like that. So that started changing the way I approached these schools, the way I decided to, let's say, attend these events, the questions I was asking at the events I was attending. So including, so a lot of schools, of course, do have events in India where I was. Some don't. Fortunately, in 2019 as well, by that time, when I actually was applying to schools, I was in the middle of my round 1 of applications. I was fairly aware of my goals and the story I had built for myself, so I knew where I was headed. And 2019 in August, I was in the US. So I was able to visit a few schools that I was keen to attend, I was keen to target. And I think that changed my perspective because when I went to a few schools, I automatically, this is not where I see myself. Okay, this is where to be. So I think a combination of these things is what really helped make my decision. But at the end of it, it was everybody's opinion that I took, a lot of information I had to soak in, and mull over it, do my own homework, and decide on what I felt I would be a good fit at, rather than, okay, just because my friend's there, it's good. Because my dad says, or my mom says it, or because the research says so. So it had to be a very personal decision, and that took a lot of time and a lot of thinking.
Great. So I think some interesting insights, Amber. I think you started by saying, how you looked at the FT rankings as the start and then networking. And for the viewers out there, I think Amber made a very good point that don't take the rankings on the face of it. There is a bigger deep dive that you can do within the rankings. But, if I could take a step back and ask Akshay, and I could bring you in here, Akshay, coming to the point of ranking, how important do you think are rankings per se? Do you think that should be the guiding light for anyone who's looking to apply to foreign B schools, or like Amber mentioned, there is more to B school hunt than just looking at rankings? What would be your take about rankings, and which is the good ranking to look at?
Right. So I think obviously rankings is a part of it. Amber rightly mentioned it's not the whole and soul. But for people usually starting out in MBA research process, it's always the first step, because it usually ends up telling you, at least in my case, I was targeting a specific geography. So I understood which colleges I'm looking at only through the rankings. So I knew that these are the 4-5 colleges that are in my eyesight, and that obviously I get only through the different metrics that I looked at through FT rankings. And as Amber mentioned, FT rankings are probably the holy grail in this respect. But I also looked at Poets and Quants, which ends up summarizing rankings across 4 different metrics. it just gives a better blend is another factor. But just to answer your question, I think rankings is definitely the starting point, but in I think that should be the only contribution. I think after that, it is your research on the individual schools and your depth and your fit that should dictate what school you should take.
That's a
And
great point. Yeah, sorry, Amar, please go on.
no, I'm sorry. I just wanted to add something very interesting to Akshay's point of view. Is that the like Poets and Quants, another resource that I really enjoyed using that was able to help me peel back the layers and understand the school better was GMAT Club, because the troves of information that you have, the treasure trove of information that you have in GMAT Club's forums that is about the school, the admission process, the alumni network was just phenomenal.
That is a great insight that's come from both the guys. Apart from FT, there's also Poets and Quants, and there's also GMAT Club as additional resources that one must look into. And I think, as Akshay very wonderfully mentioned, that it's a great starting point when you're starting out on your journey, and maybe you want to have your first list of schools that you probably want to target. Rankings could play a very, very important role, but the most important insight here is that it's not the holy grail, as you said. It's not the only factor. There's so much more to the overall journey. So, Amber, let me come to you with the next question here. How did you eventually reach towards ESA? What were the top factors that contributed to you choosing ESA as your final destination for MBA?
So interestingly, I really wish I had ESA as my number one school on day one, because what I've seen the school has been phenomenal, and I love being a part of the community right now. But my process to get there was full of a lot of rejections, a lot of choices, hard choices in many places I had to make. And so frankly, there was a point, and I'm going to take you a step back now as to what led me to picking ESA over the schools I applied to, the schools that I got into, was in the beginning, as I said, right, I was a little wedded to the rankings, and that's all I went by. And when I visited these schools in the US when I was there, that really helped me eliminate where I knew for a fact I didn't want to go. But then for me, the subset of schools that I was really eager to apply to was significantly high. And I think that is where personally my story, the alignment of my story as to what I wanted to do after, where I was coming from, I believe in round one, I really hadn't found the right formula for that. I probably wasn't able to build that narrative correctly for me. And so I guess what happened is, in the process, I was very narrow in my approach to schools. I was just looking at the top 5 schools, top 7 schools, top 10 schools in each geography, and this is it. Like, this is the end all be all. Moving beyond that is when I started attending the events. And my round one for me wasn't a smashing success, although I wish it were, but it wasn't. What happened is then, that sobering reality check allowed me to look at schools where I've started focusing on the fit a lot more, rather than just the ranking, or, this is the post MBA salary, or this is probably, this is the 3-year progression of the alumni, and this is where you get, this is where you are. And that's when I started looking at schools beyond just what my myopic vision had put me to. And that's when I looked at ESA as a very, very viable option. I started attending this first session in Delhi. It was being conducted by the admissions committee member who runs India. So I remember it was an amazing event. It was very personal. It was a very close-knit number of people, that about 25 odd people, as against some schools that have a massive attendance. So, and what happened there is, I was able to discuss with the admissions committee member a number of the, I don't think there were any current students, folks from the alumni network were there. And they spoke to us very personally. Like, this is the first school that I believe actually asked us to ask them, said, what do you not like about the school? Ask us that. We want to answer it. Like, we want you guys to know the truth, rather than just singing us a beautiful song about ESA. And at some level, that just flipped the switch to me. Like, okay, this is a place that's brutally honest, that has credentials, and that's phenomenal. So starting there, that was my first research point for ESA. After that, I started networking with a number of people from the alumni network. I obviously, after that, attended a number of their online events. So there was something interesting ESA was doing that year, was because at that time in Singapore, the crisis was just brewing somewhere in December, January. They held a virtual class, which I was to attend by the admissions committee member, and I loved it. It was phenomenal. I believe it was something on negotiations by Professor Kandarp Mehta. and I loved it. Like I just knew for a fact this is a school that has the diversity which I've been looking for all along. The class that's full of about 89 odd percent international students as against some geographies where it's a 60-40 ratio of domestic to international. And having worked internationally, I realized that this is something that I'm going to take away and do outside of just the classroom. And for me, that was it. That sealed the deal. That sealed the deal for me.
Having gone through the process of ESA, I think a lot of the points that you mentioned, I can very well relate to them. And for the viewers out there, I think I would like to emphasize what Amber said about attending these events, trying to align your fit more than anything else.
Just switching gears, and Akshay, just coming to you for the last question of this segment.
Yeah.
Now, ESA is in Barcelona, Spain, and Spain is not. It's not English is not the first language, right? It's a country that speaks Spanish. We as non-native Spanish speakers moving to Spain could be a daunting task, right? It's a bold move for someone to just pack up their bags and move to Spain all of a sudden. How did you make this bold decision at the end of the day? What prompted you to just finalize Spain as your geography?
Right.
And
so I think
before Akshay, you start, if I could just add on
Slight-
a little bit to the question that Abhinav posted. Amber touched upon, the visa part of it. So given as Indians, I think immigration is a big concern for a lot of the Indian applicants. If you could, also briefly touch upon that in your answer when talking about the geography part of it.
Right. So I think my approach was a little different from Amber in the sense that I was very wedded to Europe as a geography right from day one. So that really helped me narrow down my schools. So, and obviously research stated that ESA is one of the best programs in Europe, and my the conversation that I had and the research that I did and everything sort of fit in together that it's a school that has a great brand in Europe. And by great brand in Europe, it doesn't mean that you have to be restricted to Spain, because what holds true in Spain holds true in Amsterdam, what holds true in Amsterdam holds true in London. So which basically, and I think research highlighted this, that the fact that the school is in Spain does not mean that your post-career opportunities will be in Spain. So the language barrier there was sort of eased out in my head, where I knew that it's a place I have to be only for 2 years. And because the brand is so strong all across Europe, my mobility is going to be a lot higher. And it fits into the regions that I am interested in. Like I've always been very wedded to London as a region or Amsterdam as a region. So this sort of fit into the entire profile. And this sort of does answer the visa point also that you did mention, that because the big companies do was and has always been consulting. So I was pretty aware that if I can end up getting into one of the top 7, top 10 consulting companies, visa sponsorship in that particular country, say Netherlands or the UK, shouldn't be a problem from that perspective. And it basically renders the whole point of Spain and language and visa out of question, purely because how global and the brand that the school has in Europe.
For the people who are watching and people who are aspiring to apply to European colleges, I think the key takeaway from Akshay's answer is that look at Europe as one consolidated geography versus looking at individual countries as pieces. Great. I think
and just one small point, if I may add, I think just to circle back to what Amber mentioned previously in his first answer regarding FT rankings. He mentioned something called global mobility. I think it's a very underrated factor, and that is something that he highlighted and which holds true in my answer as well, because you having access to is a big deal. And I think it's an aspect that people don't usually look into very early on in their research, and it is something that should be given as much importance as numbers on FT rank. So yeah.
Superb. I think really, really insightful. So, we could probably close this section and come to the next section, which is a very interesting and rather bleak section, so to say, because the next section is defined, we call it as the networking mantra, and networking is a very, very overly used term. So probably if you could, jump in, if we can jump in here and get Amber to answer the importance of networking. I think Amber, you briefly did touch upon it in your answer about shortlisting. If you can, if I can, ask you specifically how important, can you just hit the point direct and answer to our viewers how important networking stands in this whole scheme of B-School application?
I'd probably rank it as number 1. If you have to rank all the things, you put the GMAT, the essays, the resume, the interview, I would definitely put the networking effort you put in at number one, hands down. And it's not just the fact that the networking helps you to get to know about the school. I remember when I was talking to schools, I wrote a mail, and there were some schools in the US that were very helpful. I applied to Cornell; they were a very helpful school. I wrote to 9 people. I ended up talking to 22. In ESA, I reached out on LinkedIn to about 3 people. I spoke to about 7 of them. So, and there were some schools obviously that are not that where the networking effort is not at your doorstep, but the effort you need to take is significantly higher. So you might write to 5 and you might get a call. You might be able to talk to one. And what it does is it just doesn't only let you understand the school better. It gives you a lot to talk about in your essays and your interview. And I think that is the differentiating aspect, because schools as well want to see somebody who's taken the effort to know about the school, about their potential classmates, and what the school as a brand offers. And that, I think, is irreplaceable.
That's a great insight, and I think the first. I'm just gonna pick the first line here where you said that you would rank it number one, as opposed to a very common perception or common understanding, especially here with a lot of folks I see, is that they tend to rank GMAT as probably the number one factor, and they think that okay, if they've got a 740 or 760, a top five FT ranked school is a given. That it's there's no way that's not gonna happen. But a very very different insight that we get here from you, and it's very very interesting. So just switching gears on the same lines, Akshay, how would you define this word networking? I mean, in your personal experience, and for our viewers out there, what suggestions would you give them on how to network and with whom to network?
Right. So I think in my case, since I was a little more wedded to ESA as a school from, so just to give some background, I had applied in my first year in my round two and I was waitlisted, and I maintained relationship with the school. And since I was hellbent on ESA as a school, applying to early decision next year was a no-brainer, and I had gotten in that round. So just to give you some context, because I think I can walk you through how my journey was during this entire process. I think I had interactions with the admissions committee on a very, very regular basis just to see what I was lacking in my application, what I could improve on. Were there any suggestions from their side? Is there any additional effort that I could put in next year when I apply? And so on and so forth. And this was really helpful because it also gave me inputs as to how to improve my application. But it also, more importantly, also highlighted how serious I was about the school on a consistent basis, not just on one round, but spanning a course of 2 different years applications, right from R2 to next year's ED. And obviously early decision is a very clear indicator of intent. But the fact that I continued the conversation throughout R2 to ED with a focus on trying to keep learning more about the school, keep trying to realize why it's a better fit for me, keep trying to improving my application in terms of how I would be a good fit for the school. I think a continuous conversation with the caveat in the head that this conversation should purely be from a point of view of you wanting to learn about the school and you wanting to understand it better. All the other perks that follow are byproducts, and they follow. You don't need to seek them. You don't need to be wedded to them. You just need to approach it from an information point of view. Everything else will follow. And I think even Amber will agree with me on this point of view, that you do see it in the interview calls that you get. You do see it in your results as to which school is really interested in you and which school actually sees the effort that you've been trying to put in. It's very evident. It's you can actually see it. There's no two ways about it.
100%. I can't disagree with Akshay here. Every school will ask you, who have we spoken to? What did you talk about? What do you know about a school? And that's how you get to know about the school.
Absolutely. I think again, this your insights about both of your insights about how to network and who to network with and where it stands up in terms of the overall importance of the B school application is great. And just going back to what I think Amber mentioned, that you never know where this might be asked. for people who may not have, ever applied, if I could just share something, that while I was applying, I did not know that the application itself will have this question: have you attended these events? So if you have if you have attended these events, and if you've spoken to the alumni, your answer there is positive rather than negative, which adds a lot of seriousness to your profile, which I think Akshay also spoke briefly about. If quickly on the networking topic, I could ask maybe each of you one point to for the incoming candidates who are hearing you and who are learning from this video, things not to do while networking, or things where people you have seen go wrong when people approach you on LinkedIn, or just one top of the head recommendation that people should be mindful of.
I can start with this. I think one big thing that I would say to keep in mind when reaching to people is have a clear intent. I think the moment you see a very clear intent as to why that person wants to reach out to you with a very structured message which highlights as to why you are the right person to help him, I think that itself takes care of 70-80% of the problem, because you know that you can provide value addition to his process. The moment I know I can provide value addition to someone's process, I am basically wedded to his application. Then I'll be interested, and then I will reply, and then I'll obviously take it forward from there. And for example, I would always be more inclined, or I would think I would be more useful person and is applying to very similar schools to me, having a very similar approach. But that's not to say I won't help others, but I don't think I would provide as much as a value addition vis-a-vis me trying to help someone with a very similar background. That would be my sort of as to how to try and get a very, because in the end you have to structure it in a way as to how that insight is going to help you. It's not a conversation for the sake of a conversation.
Absolutely. Amber, do you want to add something to that?
I think Akshay beat me to it. That's exactly the first thing I was going to say. Have a very clear ask and give. So that's pretty much what Akshay said. I think the next stage of that is where I would like to add something which I have seen firsthand, is be respectful of somebody else's time. They're helping you out. Just be nice about it. Like, ask them when they're free. If you've set up a 30-minute call, be sure it's a 30-minute call. And it's okay to be a minute or two late, but just send a message if you're running late. Things like that.
Just probably adding from my anecdote as well. I think another thing which I have personally seen that can go along with is you've got to be very, very well prepared with your research. So when you reach out with your first question or with your ask, just make sure that it is not something that can easily be accessed by the website, right? Website is your first source, and if your answers lie there, you don't really have to ask those same questions to people. So I think one strategy that I've also seen work well is be very make the questions personalized. Maybe ask them about their experiences and ask them questions which are not really out there on the website, especially. Anant, you want to add something to it?
So I think very, very fruitful discussion about networking. And unless any one of you have anything else to add to it, probably we could move to a section 3, which is called support and guidance. So, if this is another key question, I have personally seen a lot of my friends grappling with it. And Akshay, probably, you could take a lead on this and just tell me that how important is additional or external help to this whole B school process, because we all know that, at some point we have all spoken to counselors, and did you, if you're comfortable answering that, did you take some counselor, or do you generally have any view about doing an application by yourself versus getting external help?
I think, and this might sound like a cliched answer, I think it's very subjective. And my point of view on this subjective part is that it's about how good are you with structuring your thoughts, because your thoughts are yours. Your thoughts and your thoughts and your pitch is not going to come from someone else. That has to be a very authentic pitch that comes from straight, and to sound as cliched, straight from the heart, because that's what is resonating with the school, that's what is resonating with you, and that's how you will fit. I would advise help only if you think you are not very good at structuring your thoughts and sort of tabulating it in the right manner in the way in the school essays are asked. Because if you rely on thoughts coming from someone else, then I think that itself is a big red flag.
Very, very valid. Just on the same lines, Amber, I'm going to ask you this, that we are all very busy with our full-time jobs as well, right? And it's not an easy process to go through, like 8 months, 12 months, more than that, just going through the grind of studying for GMAT, giving GMAT exams, and then writing your applications while at the same time networking and doing your own job, right? So it's a very popular saying that charity begins at home, and all your help starts from your home itself. Who were the key people from your family who really supported you in this process? And maybe if you're comfortable, what were some of the things that they did that really helped you in the process?
So I have a mix of people in my family who bring very different opinions. So my mom's an academician all her life. So she had a very academic perspective about programs and the way I was approaching everything. My dad's a pragmatist. So this little glass that you see on the bookshelf here, I had printed the FA ranking in A3 and I had pinned it on these glasses here. And I'd call him every few days when I was working on my application. I'd be like, okay, Dad, now stand in front of this, get your pen out, and this is the school, this is not the school, this is the school, this is not the school. Look at the ranking, go to the column number 4, column number 5. So so more than that, he was a massive sounding board because there could be something so ridiculously stupid that you have as an idea, which you may not be able to share with your friends or probably your colleagues, that you probably share with a safe space. So he of sorts became my safe space to share the dumbest of ideas that I had, like I'll apply here and here and here and this and that. So like, okay, why? Like he forced you to think beyond that. So he was that sounding board for me. My brother is so the entire process. He was the balancing. He did the balancing act. He was the one person who kept asking. He was the realist. Like why? Like, okay, you really think you can get here? Why? What's the demographic profile like? So he's a very metric driven guy, and he's a doctor. So for him, it was a very different point of view to be looked at. Like, okay, so what's your end game at this school? What's your end game at that school? Okay, next year, after that, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. He really took me down that path. But through all the late night disheartening moments when I got rejected, or probably when I knew I'd bombed an interview, or I knew I just sent out a very underprepared application, the one person was just my girlfriend. She was there through all of that, and and you need someone to just be there when you screw up.
Amazing to hear, how your family partnered in your journey, and right from your father to your brother to your girlfriend to your mom. I think
entirely, yeah.
Entirely. So that's a very wonderful thing that your family could actually, partner with you in this journey that you went through. And it happens to be a pretty long journey. Just for the viewers out there. So like Akshay said, it's a very subjective thing and it depends from person to person. I have met people, and Akshay is probably one of them on this call, who mentioned that you need to be clear in your heart and clear in your mind, then you don't need any other help. But on the same side, I have met people, and probably Amber is representing that side of people who needs that sounding off. It may be in the form of an external professional counselor, or it may be in the form of a friend who's already gone through it. It may be from your family. So it really varies from person to person. But I think the key takeaway is you got to decide whether you have that family support in-house, or do you need to get some.
So, Anant, I'd also add one more thing. So after the debacle I had in round 1, I did get external help as well. And that was primarily, as Akshay was saying, to help me structure my thoughts. Because what had happened is, at a certain level, I was trying to achieve too much with what I wanted from the MBA. So what they helped me with is, okay, extract the necessary components and bring that out. So I definitely did value in external help as well.
So Akshay, just a follow-up question to that. Very interesting that you mentioned that, it depends from profile to profile. Let's take your case, right? Even just to get that clarity that, okay, these are my aces, these are my strong cards that I want to stick to and I want to hold on to. Did somebody help you in that process to even make these things realize that, okay, this is exactly what your game plan is, and that's how you can probably, move forward with? Was there somebody who you looked up to, basically?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say my father. So my father has he has been working in like he's dealt with a lot of consultants. I haven't in his professional career. Him having a very strong engineering background, so he's worked with consultants before, and he knows my personality. Obviously, he knows my strengths, my weaknesses, and he realizes that this is probably the best career path, having done it for 5 years, and this is where I should continue. And he's someone who's always had a very international mindset right from day one, to at least do one set of education from outside India. And having traveled a lot to Europe and just understanding the culture, I think we were right from day one very hell-bent on Europe as an identity. So mapping the region, mapping the skill set, and mapping post-career and how the industry is shaping up, I think these three things, Dad was the biggest sounding board when it comes to trying to fit all the pieces together, I would say.
I think we can probably move on to our next segment. This has been extremely joyous for me to go through this segment of support and guidance. Our next segment is called Busting the Myths. And this is one of my favorite segments because there are so many myths out there about this whole journey, whether it's GMAT, whether it's application process, networking, so many myths out there, right? So Akshay, let me start with you. What were some of the general myths that you came across in your journey? Top two, top three myths that you can talk about, and how did you course correct them over a period of time?
Okay, I think I'd like to address the elephant in the room, that the question that everyone has regarding GMAT, your quantitative ability, and your fit for the MBA. And I think all of them need to be addressed together because that's how the B school looks at them. So I think that's one of the biggest myths that people have when you approach an application, that it's, and this is pertaining to a very concrete score that you have in your head, thinking if my score is above a certain level, I'm in. If my score is below a certain level, I'm out. Unfortunately or fortunately, the process is not that discrete. It completely depends on the mapping of your score with your profile. And I think that's a big part of the application that people don't really comprehend. Just to give my example, I think my GMAT score obviously will be tied to my background, which is a quant heavy engineering background. So my GMAT score will obviously be looked at in relation to my engineering background, also in relation to the fact that I have worked 5 years in consulting, which is a quant heavy kind of a background. So there is no way I can pinpoint a GMAT score and say that this is a particular score above which I'm going to get rejected and below which I'm going to get accepted, or vice versa. Basically, it's not that black and white a process. And the big caveat to this being that when you look at your FT rankings and your pages of your big schools, it gives you a range of GMAT score that you should try and target. And I think range being the key operative word here, because in the end, it's all about odds, right? You're basically looking at probabilities. And if the school has a certain range over a course of the last 5 years, 6 years, that's a trend you should be typically targeting. So say the range of the average GMAT of a particular school is 680 or 690. And you have a very typical, you have a profile which is very generic, then you should be slightly closer to the range or slightly above that range. If you have a profile which is slightly unique, you can be a little below that. Broadly, the range for a particular school like this should be somewhere between like a 670 and a 710. And a range is the most important thing and not a discrete score. I think that is one thing that candidates don't realize early on in their application process. And it is completely subjective to your profile, your work experience, and the way you approach the skill sets that the MBA looks out for.
Amazing. I think Akshay addressed the elephant in the room, like you mentioned. GMAT is the key operative question that most people struggle with, including myself when I was doing it. And just to, probably summarize what Akshay said, I think for people who are out there, don't just tie yourself down to just one number. Look at your profile, tie it to a broad range that school operates with, and different schools operate at a different average GMAT. But be mindful of the fact that it is just an average number and the range is typically quite wide. And based on your profile, if you can bring in certain other aspects in your profile, I think GMAT can be compensated. And Akshay put it quite nicely. Amber, if I could, ask you if you would want to, bust some of the myths that a lot of people, come across when they're applying. It could be some of the points I think we may have touched briefly in our earlier questions, but maybe around the visas, maybe around the rankings, maybe around scholarships, maybe around anything. The general myths that
before I jump to the other points, I have a different predicament with my GMAT. I too am an engineer, and there's this default assumption that being an engineer you need to have a broadly higher quant score. I didn't. I'm the engineer who had a higher verbal score, like significantly higher as compared to my quant. And I was worried because some schools did point that out to me. And so this is not something we would be comfortable with. So that's fine. That's absolutely okay. That's not the end of the world. The other thing that I was talking about ignoring is don't ignore your AWA and IR. because down the road, although it may not be something that is the only looked at factor during your applications, but some schools do look at that. And specifically, if you have it very clearly mentioned in your profile and your essays that you want to go into consulting, let's say, or maybe into a very quant heavy field, the IR is looked at. And there's something I've heard from the admissions committee members directly in my interviews. So they do look at that. So I would say, no, so most people tend to be like, okay, I'm going to ace the quant, ace the verbal, and it's okay. Whatever is in the IR, we'll wing it whenever it comes. So don't do that. Regarding the other points, I think one thing is that I 100% agree with what Akshay said is play the odds, right? So if you are in a certain range, don't try to reinvent it and be like, okay, I have a phenomenal everything else and I'm playing the odds. Fine, it's okay. If it's your dream school, if it's something that you are really invested in, go for it. But do know the time you're taking away from a school that you have a good shot at, you're probably taking it away from that, because you can't do about 25 schools or as many as you can. So you want to put your best foot forward. And in that case, that's why the research and homework is extremely important. I've been through the process of carpet bombing. It doesn't work. I've burnt my fingers with that. It doesn't work. It's better to stay focused. The third thing I'd say, and this is again, as I touched upon earlier, is the profile that I have was very non-standard. Just because you don't have a brand name on your profile, it's not the end of the world. A lot of people told me this, is that, oh, you've not worked at one of those Fortune 500 companies, they're not going to recognize you for it. Okay, yes, it looks great on your resume. But is it something that the schools will view as a rejection factor? Absolutely not. What people don't realize is that your resume is going to have 4 or 5 bullets below that. And that adds value. And that's what you really have to bring out. And the fourth thing, and this is something, and I know my point of view on social work and volunteering work is very different. The things I've done from my college days to what I was doing my professional life as well. Don't start something T minus 365 days of your applications or T minus 180 days. It's very obvious. So even if you've probably taken care of, or you funded some children once a year, maybe in the last 3 years, it's fine. Talk about the reasons of why you did that. Talk about the smaller things. Maybe you're in an intensive job that makes you work 12, 14 hours. They get it. You don't have time to invest that much in social work. It's fine. It speaks that you have a trend of doing that. Reflect that. If you start the last minute, I mean, they're the admissions committee of one of the best business schools in the world. They're going to see through you. So these are the 4 things that I would stick with as the myths, or at least the points to be aware of.
Amazing. So, given that we spoke so much about GMAT, if I could ask quickly, does IESE as a school accept GRE, or is it only does it only screen candidates based on GMAT? And is GRE looked in a negative light, or is it at the same level playing field as GMAT when admissions teams are looking at the candidates? Any of you, if you have anything to add?
Akshay, you want to take this one, because I really don't have a lot of perspective on the GRE particularly.
Yeah, sure. So I think, to be honest, I've done a little bit of research on this, so I can give my 2 cents on it. In terms of, I think, again, it's a trend. I think it started only in the last few years that school have opened themselves up to the GRE as an exam via the GMAT. But since we're in the process of them accepting it, and it's only natural that biases take time to heal over time, there's no doubt that I think if you view two applications, you will have some sort of bias in your head when it comes to GMAT, because it has been the gold standard of B-School applications for so long. And while I hope that it changes, because over a course of time, I think we're in that stage where it's changing, where definitely I think from a psychological point of view, they will look at the GMAT as a slightly higher, give more weight to it. But that being said, I think that trend is changing, and people are a lot more open to GREs and you're giving that exam for your entrance exam. I think one thing that I would like to highlight in this respect is how sort of schools will look at the GMAT to GRE conversion as a factor. And I think this ties down to what I mentioned earlier regarding what your profile looks like. And for example, if you have a background as a communications expert, or you've done something that is not related to quant at all, and your graduation is also like a bachelor in arts or something like that, so you have no quantitative background, and you give the GRE and your quant score is low. Now this sort of ties into the whole process that they don't see you as a good fit because they don't think you can cope up with the quant rigor of the program is what and vis-a-vis, if you have that background and you go end up getting a 170 or 117 GRE, then they sort of do realize that, this person does have a quant background. I don't really need to look at anything else because he's sort of clearing that bucket of my application. And this will, as I said earlier, change from application to application, case to case. There really is no right answer, and it is truly the biggest black box, if you ask me. So all you can try and do is, I think, create like a small map of your strengths, your weaknesses, and just try and see how you can plug those weaknesses with the different tools that the application process is trying to provide.
This should bring us to our next segment, which is words of wisdom. And Amber, let me start with you here. In words of wisdom, we just want you to highlight the top 2-3 suggestions for people who are considering ESA very strongly, or people who might not be very sure and they are a bit confused about ESA. Top 2-3 suggestions for them.
Okay, one, I would say be ready for a global experience. If you are somebody who is looking to be in one specific geography, which could probably be in your home country, the US or Canada, or let's say Singapore or India for that matter, ESA might not be the place for you. It might be if you're willing to explore multiple geographies, because as Anand mentioned earlier, the international mobility, that factor that some schools in Europe offer, and ESA leads the pack there, is something you should definitely consider if you're looking to go into ESA. Second, if you have an entrepreneurial mindset, if that is something you have shown, experienced, enjoyed at any point in your life, ESA is known for that. Entrepreneurship and general management are the mainstays of ESA. And these are two things that can work in any field. You go into tech, you go into consulting, you go to investment banking. These are two things that ESA builds itself and prides itself on. So definitely be ready for that. And the third most important thing is get to love the sun and sand. Barcelona is a phenomenal city. You've got the beach right there. You've got the hills, and it's a gateway to every place in Europe, every place in Africa, and in all fairness, all over the globe. But I would say if you are willing to immerse yourself in a culture that's not going to be single country, because it's a melting pot from all over the place. I think I mentioned earlier there were 89, 90% of people who come from all over the globe, and 10% are locals there. You have to fall in love. You have to be very open. If you're willing to absorb, you're willing to experiment, you're willing to embrace that culture, ESA is the place for you, hands down.
Amazing. I think Amber put it very rightly, and these are the things that ESA also, boldly talks about on their website, in their discussions. Akshay, would you want to add something to, some of the key suggestions that you may have for incoming prospective applicants who are looking at applying to ESA coming cycles?
Right. So I think apart from the standard process that people go through, I would like to focus on the software aspects. I would say I think that is grossly neglected because you cannot brainstorm stories, situations, strengths, and weaknesses overnight. It's a process that takes a long time, discussions, iterations, delivery. And I would highly recommend for people who are serious about applying to schools in B schools. I think the interview process is basically made up of what I just spoke about. So take enough time to really do a character mapping and a strengths and weakness mapping, and list down all your stories very carefully, and be authentic. I think that is the biggest thing, because if you're authentic about your experiences, delivery sort of takes care of itself.
Thanks a lot, guys. This brings us to the end of our season episode 2. And as always, it's a great pleasure talking to you. And conversations like this can be, extremely important and value additive for people who are coming next year. And the whole idea of having doing these interviews is, for the people who are going to come, so they can gain from this. Abhinav, do you want to add something to that?
Just thank you so much, guys. Congratulations on getting through ESA, and we really hope that you both have a transformational journey, a journey to remember, and a journey for life. Thank you for being here. Thank you for sparing the time.
Congrats to you guys as well, and thank you for having us.
Thank you. Thank you. A lot of fun.
Thanks
you.
a lot.
Thanks a lot, guys. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. Stay healthy, stay safe. Bye, guys.
Bye. Thanks.
Best of luck, everyone who's watching this.